Back to our breaking news this morning. Former U.S. Senator and presidential candidate Bob Dole has passed away. He was 98 years old. Kim Brines has more on his life and legacy.
A political giant in Kansas and across the country, Senator Bob Dole served in Congress for more than 3 decades. Robert Joseph Dole was born July 22, 1923 in Russell, Kansas. His father ran a grain elevator. His mom, a traveling saleswoman who sold sewing machines and vacuum cleaners. After graduating high school in 1941, he enrolled at the University of Kansas, recruited to play basketball by legendary coach Phog Allen. The United States' entry into World War II interrupted Senator Dole's college years. He joined the U.S. Army in 1942. He deployed to Italy in 1944. A year later, he suffered severe injuries to his upper back and shoulder after getting shot. Rescuers got to him after he laid in a foxhole for almost 9 hours. Medics at the time thought he might not survive, but he did. The wounds left him with some physical limitations. He spent more than 3 years recovering. The attack left him with limited use of his right arm and hand. Senator Dole received 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. After recovering, he returned to college, this time at Washburn University in Topeka. He later graduated with an undergraduate and law degree. Senator Dole married in 1948, a therapist at a veterans hospital in Michigan named Phyllis Holden. They had a daughter named Robin. Phyllis and Senator Dole divorced in 1972. 3 years later, he married his second wife, Elizabeth. He turned to politics in 1950, running for the Kansas House of Representatives. 2 years later, voters elected him to county attorney for Russell County. In 1960, Senator Dole ran for Congress and won. 8 years later, he ran for the U.S. Senate and won. He served in the upper chamber for 5 terms. His national profile grew in 1971 as he became the chairman of the Republican National Committee. In 1976, he joined the Republican ticket, running with President Gerald Ford as his VP. That campaign highlighted with the Republican National Convention at Kemper Arena in Kansas City. The Ford-Dole ticket lost to Jimmy Carter. Senator Dole ran for president unsuccessfully in 1980 and 1988. Back in the Senate, he served as the Republican leader from 1985 to 1996. He earned a reputation for being a consensus builder and bringing people from both sides of the aisle together. As the '96 presidential campaign started, Senator Dole set his eyes on the White House again. Many saw the Senate Majority Leader as the frontrunner for the GOP nomination. At the age of 73, he officially became the party's nominee at the Republican National Convention in San Diego. Senator Dole picked former New York Congressman Jack Kemp as his running mate. They lost in a landslide to President Bill Clinton and Vice President Al Gore. After leaving politics, Senator Dole remained active in a number of causes fighting hunger around the world. He became an advocate for people with disabilities. He fought for better health care for military veterans. He helped raise money for a World War II memorial in Washington, D.C. In 2003, the Robert J. Dole Institute of Politics opened at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. He wanted to make sure the institute isn't a shrine to Bob Dole. Instead, he wanted it to encourage public service and civilized debate. He received a number of awards over his lifetime. President Clinton presented him with the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1997. He received the American Patriot Award in 2004 for his service to the country and in World War II. Senator Dole went on a statewide tour in 2014 to thank Kansans for giving him the privilege to serve the state. In January 2018, President Donald Trump awarded Senator Dole the Congressional Gold Medal for his service to the nation. In September of 2018, Washburn University honored him with a statue on campus. In December of 2018, a touching tribute from Senator Dole to honor President George Herbert Walker Bush. An aide helped him stand and salute the former president's casket in the Capitol Rotunda. The next year, Congress unanimously voted to promote him from captain to colonel for his service in the U.S. Army. He called it humbling, and he was incredibly grateful.
Wow, that was an amazing tribute to Bob Dole. And joining us now for more on the life and legacy of Senator Bob Dole is political analyst Michael Yockey. Good morning, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Morning,
of
Sarah.
course, we just heard a long list of accomplishments, major leader in the Republican Party. First off, what are your thoughts this morning? I mean, obviously a devastating loss, but he did die peacefully in his sleep, and he served our country for 79 years of service.
Well, I was fortunate to have my career in Congress when I worked for Speaker Pelosi overlap with that of Senator Dole when he was the majority leader and then minority leader. He is someone who represents, I think, the sort of the old style of Republican politics. Someone who, as that story showed, encountered incredible hardship growing up. He lived in poverty, grew up during the Depression. He was injured to the point of being left for dead on the battlefield with the famed 10th Mountain Division, one of the most storied units in American history in Italy. Fought back from that, and he was worried about selling pencils on the street. But when he came back, he was so disabled, and someone who, because of his disability, was one of the champions of the Americans with Disabilities Act when he was in the Senate. He never forgot about that. So this is someone who is a giant in American politics, someone who had a reputation for being kind of tough and even a little mean, but then later on in life poked fun at that version of himself in a lot of interesting commercials. So a great American, a great Republican as we used to know them, someone whose legacy still exists with the ADA and who will be missed by many in this country.
Yeah, I mean, did you meet him face to face? And if so, what was that encounter like?
You know, it's interesting. Being on the House side, you sometimes would run into them in the Senate in the elevators. But the one chance I had to actually speak with him was about, I would say, maybe 8 years ago. I was on a flight to Washington for business and happened to be in the same little car between terminals I looked over and there was Bob Dole, and I thought, well, heck, I'm just going to go over and say hello. And I did, and we had a nice chat for about 5 minutes as we were going from terminal to terminal. And it really is, it's one of those highlights in my life because he is someone whose personal bravery and personal courage is someone who I admire greatly. And anyone who's run for president, as he did many, many times, lost, accepted it, and poked fun at it, and still manages to keep his humor and dignity about him as someone who, and we joked about that. We talked about his career. It was an amazing experience for me.
Great example of one of those times when you run into someone and you're like, should I go up to them or not? And no regrets, you did go up to him, and his legacy.
Life is short, you should just do it.
Exactly. Life is short. Now, his legacy in World War II, you mentioned that he was seriously wounded in Italy, 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star. That's huge. And I'm sure that affected the way he went through Congress and Senate and his policies. You mentioned part of what he did with the Disabilities Act. What else kind of really contributed to his service in politics?
Well, I mean, he was someone who believed in the bipartisanship of American foreign policy. He's someone who believed that America needed to have a presence abroad, and World War II, for that, the greatest generation, really brought it home. And little things, too. I mean, one of the things you sort of learned early on is that, you know, you don't shake hands with his right hand because his entire right shoulder and right arm were crippled. He couldn't even lift it, I think, much more beyond his waist. Little things like that. But I think that it really made him someone who was tough, who believed that everyone should be able to overcome adversity. But at the same time, the compassion for what he went through. The Americans with Disabilities Act is one of, next to the Voting and Civil Rights Act, is probably one of the greatest civil rights acts of this country. And his leadership in the Senate at the time was critical in getting it through. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, in which I sit, actually first proposed the ADA, and it was people like Bob Dole and others who took it up in the Congress and made it law so that people today with disabilities are accommodated and have dignity in their lives as they go forward and can work. because, again, he thought that his only job coming out of the war was going to be selling pencils on the street because of how badly disabled he was.
And look at that political career that he had.
Right.
Just lastly, touching on just something that is quite amazing. I mean, he ran with Ford. They lost. And then that was as a vice president role. Then he was like, I'm going to go and be president. He got the
Right.
Republican nomination. The Republican ticket, lost against Clinton. What was that election like? I certainly don't remember the details.
Yeah, in fact, I was involved in that election. I did a lot of work with the Clinton campaign during that time. And it was interesting because Bob Dole had such a big presence. But the funny thing is, whenever I say Bob Dole, is that one of the things that Dole did sometimes to his own detriment, and then later as a line of humor, is he often referred to himself as Bob Dole. And it was the sort of running joke that Bob Dole was going to do this. And his campaign was admittedly a complete flop. We were surprised by how quickly it disintegrated. But in that, still, he lost gracefully. He lost with humor. He knew toward the end that it was just not going to happen. And he just basically decided, I'm not going to go scorched earth. I'm not going to do everything I can to undermine my opponent as much as some people who are in desperate straits could do. He decided, I'm just going to start easing it down. I'm going to lose with dignity, and this country is going to go on. And that, to me, is a very big demonstration of how he always put country above his own personal beliefs or commitments. And that's something that we should all take a lesson from, and that all politicians should continue to take a lesson from, because country first, you second.
That is so true. Having that humility and then also just that dignity, of course, putting your country first. That's what
Right.
service is all about. He's a World War II hero forever, and he passed away this morning, 98 years old, passed away in his sleep. Michael Yaki, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate hearing your perspective and hearing about the legacy of Bob Dole. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Sarah.
After the break.